Booktube, I got a big old stack of books and a dream to help you learn ancient Greek history. So that is what is on the agenda today. We're going to try to get you on the path to creating your own chronological list. We'll explore various options. It's going to be very nerdy, but very cool. So make sure to sub to the channel if you like this type of content. Click on the like button for me. Share it with a friend. Check out my subscriber community on Bindery, where we've got a whole history book master list that I'm constantly updating. If you're into that type of thing, you can get updates on the book my publishing imprint is publishing. Also, come join our Discord server, where everyone is really chill and amazing. They all have banger book recommendations too. But enough of the calls to action. Let's get to the chronological ancient Greek history book list. Let's go. Okay, but first some qualifiers. As Dan Carlin would say, I am not a historian. I am a fan of history. That should be obvious. I'm not pretending that this is the only way to do it. It's just the way that I've done it, and I'm open to being recommended other books on this topic, so please hit me with those in the comments. I also want to make this fairly accessible to a general audience, with a few exceptions from some classical Greek sources, even one more modern book. If you want to go all hardcore and read the ancient sources like Polybius, Arrian, Xenophon, and so forth, nobody is stopping you. And I'd even encourage it if you're already acclimated to the subject or you're familiar with reading ancient sources. And finally, I am omitting some sweeping histories that would work as a good general introduction. I'll talk about those in another video. I'm going to break a rule immediately simply because I can, but these two books are incredibly important to understanding the ancient Greek mindset. I mean, I just have to talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer, and we all know what these are about, right? The Iliad is set during the Trojan War, which possibly took place in the late Bronze Age around the 12th or 13th century BC. The Odyssey is set 10 years after that and focuses on the journey of Odysseus trying to get back home to Ithaca. I've got a few translations of them. There's the W.H.D. Rouse. There's also Robert Fagles. Emily Wilson is on the shelf back there. It's just a matter of preference as far as that goes, so I'll keep it moving. I'd say my weakest understanding of ancient Greek history reaches from what are called the Greek Dark Age to the Archaic Age, which stem from roughly 1180 to 800 BC and 800 to 650 BC respectively. Authors like A.M. Snodgrass, Robin Osborne, and Jonathan Hall have written about this period. Those books are limited print and a little pricey, but where I started to pick up this thread was in some books that weren't dealing solely with the Greeks, and two of them have opposite narratives regarding the theory that the Dorian invaders kicked off the Greek Dark Age. For instance, in The History of the Ancient World by Susan Wise Bauer, she's either arguing in favor of or simply repeating the traditional narrative that the Dorians invaded Greece as part of this large-scale migration that pushed out the Mycenaeans. Pronunciation is going to be weird on this video, I promise you, don't be a dick about it. Who, along with the Minoans, were the earliest inhabitants of Greece that developed advanced cultures. This is in chapter 40, The Dark Age of Greece, with the subtitle, In Greece Between 1200 and 1050 BC, Dorian Invaders Bring a Dark Age. Now, in 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed, Eric H. Klein pushes back against this, saying that there's no archaeological or historical evidence of this, and pins the blame on a variety of factors. And look, I could stick on this subject for a while, but I'm just going to wrap it up by saying if you want to know about this topsy-turvy time in Greek history, 1177 BC is a fascinating book that covers that and more. By the way, you can also follow it up with his follow-up, After 1177 BC, the Survival of Civilizations. And we'll just fast forward past the Archaic period, where the three main dialect groups are now well established in Greece, and we start getting on some firmer ground. Kinda. I say kinda because this is where you could take the plunge and pick up the histories by Herodotus. And while he's known as the father of history, he's also known as the father of lies. But no matter what you think of him, he's crucial to our understanding of Greek history, because when he leaves the scene and his narrative stops, we don't have a whole lot to go on. Herodotus covers a time period from around the late 6th century to mid 5th century BC, essentially from the rise of the Persian Empire and Cyrus the Great through the two Persian invasions of Greece, ending around 479 BC. And he also traces the origins of that conflict between Greece and Persia. There's backgrounds on the Trojan War, the Lydians, Medes, Egyptians, Persians, and so on. You'll get the rise of Persia. You'll zoom in on the Ionian Revolt, where Greek cities in Asia Minor pushed back against Persian rule, which was smashed pretty comprehensively. You'll also get the first and second Persian invasions, the first in 490 BC, ending in the Battle of Marathon. The second runs from 480 to 479 BC, where you'll get the famous battles of Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea, and so on. And if I'm not mistaken, this 2003 Penguin Classics edition of the Selincourt translation is the book that I've owned the longest out of all of the books in my personal library. I'll admit that I was not prepared at all to read and absorb this the first time around, but I did it anyway. The reread later was much more productive, and later I did pick up and read through another translation that I love. That is the Tom Holland translation, and I think he did a bang-up job with this. The notes in here are great. I know he recently translated the Roman historian Suetonius, and I'm definitely going to pick that up. But I also bring up Holland because if you want something more accessible on this period, Persian Fire, The First World Empire, and The Battle for the West by Tom Holland is a fantastic option for this period. I talked more about this book in a video I did way back in November, talking about books like the movie 300. So that's going to save me some rambling here. But yeah, even though Holland's style does take some getting used to, I thought this was engaging, vivid. Holland weaves this narrative together with real flair, and he also gives a decent amount of coverage to the Persians. This is pretty equal on the coverage between the Persians and the Greeks. He really emphasizes how powerful and sophisticated the Achaemenid Empire was, while also challenging older Eurocentric framing around these events. So this book might do for you what it did for me and get you hooked on Persian history as well. The next major event in Greek history comes very shortly after this. Think of it like the World War II, when America and the Soviet Union emerged as the big winners and the global superpowers that now have to reckon with each other. And Athens and Sparta went through something similar after the Persian Wars, as they both rose to prominence among the Greek city-states. Like, instead of like NATO and the Warsaw Pact, you had the Delian League led by Athens and the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta. And this war did not stay cold. This thing was cooking in the oven for about 27 years, from 431 to 404 BC. Much like the Persian Wars, I'm going to give you a classical source followed by a modern author, because if I didn't mention Thucydides, I'm sure I would see him mentioned in the comments, and he really is a fantastic source for this conflict. And additionally, I don't think he gets enough credit as a storyteller, because this is not a dry list of facts. Thucydides is quite good at like dialing in on like the very human moments. So this is an excellent and crucial read. I am partial to the Landmark series of books. So I've got the Landmark Thucydides, which is edited by Robert B. Strassler. There's also an introduction by Victor Davis Hanson, who wrote his own book on this titled A War Like No Other, which I admittedly still need to read. Quick side note here, since I mentioned the introduction, a good tip that has worked for me is to check out the introduction or preface for any history book that you might be hesitant about, because not only are you going to get a sense of the style, but you're going to understand how the author is attacking it, right? Like, this is the advantage that it has over fiction. Back covers can only say so much. The introduction of a history book is going to tell you the exact topics you're going to explore, the questions that are going to be asked, the theories that are going to be posited, if there are any issues with the sources. It'll tell you if it's a chronological order or if it's a stack of subjects to work through that are spread out all over the timeline. You'll know if it's a top-down or bottom-up history, meaning like, is it a history of rulers and very important people, or is it more about the common everyday person and their experiences? Like, currently I'm reading The Revolutionary Temper by Robert Darnton. It's about the years preceding the French Revolution and the whole build-up to it. And my expectations for this was set by the intro. I know that we're going to get like some royal inscriptions and words from the court and so on, but a lot of it is going to come from pamphlets being circulated in the streets, like politically infused songs that the people would sing. We're going to get the gossip. We're going to get not just the high-level events, but how those events influenced common folk in these various sections of Parisian life. Another great example of this is Carthage Must Be Destroyed by Richard Miles. It's an all-timer for me. I read it over 5 years ago, and I still remember the impact the introduction had on me. In fact, I remember exactly where I was sitting when I first read it. It set the tone. So with all of these, if you're on the fence or you're interested, read or listen to the intro and get a feel for it, because we all have our preferences. What works for me might not always work for you, but I hope with the intros and taking a look at that and what I'm recommending is close enough to the mark for you. All right, I had to do a battery change, so we're back to filming and we are back to the topic at hand. The more modern treatment that I did for the Peloponnesian War is the Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan, which differs from Thucydides' narrative recounting and offers critical analysis and his own interpretations of some of the events, some of which reveal his neoconservative leanings. Same for Victor Davis Hanson. Do with that information what you will. But while I don't find that disqualifying, I do find it useful to understand where like the author is coming from, whether it's right, left, up, down, because everybody has bias and that's going to show up in different ways. And I don't want to make it like a habit of saying like this author leans left or right or anyway. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Anyway, that's a trio of books that you can pick from for the wildly destructive Peloponnesian Wars. There's so many crazy events and memorable figures that come from this. It's also the setting of one of my favorite video games of all time, which is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I've played through 3 times. Love that game. Now we need to focus on the big winner of that conflict and trace their arc of their rise and fall. We're going to do that with the Spartans, the World of the Warrior Heroes of Ancient Greece by Paul Cartledge. And also we're going to do it with the Sacred Band, 300 Theban Lovers in the Last Day of Greek Freedom by James Romm. The Spartans mainly covers 480 to 360 BC with some spillover on either side. So you are going to have some crossover with some of the earlier books that I mentioned because the Peloponnesian Wars were obviously very important. Same for the Persian Wars. I find this to be an incredibly balanced portrayal of Sparta, especially when compared with how they can be romanticized in movies like 300. And along with all the snapshots of major figures and successes and failures in military matters, you're also going to dig into their treatment of the Helots and the other nefarious aspects of their culture. Then you have the Thebans, who are responsible for beating the Spartan dominance back and beating them back for good. And this book by James Romm is going to focus roughly on a 40-year period in the 4th century BC, where you see the formation of the Sacred Band and Thebes' rise to prominence as the new dominant force, including them smashing the Spartans at the Battle of Leuctra. I have 2 Romm books on this list. I find him incredibly insightful and engaging. He's a tremendous author at boiling down complex events, so I would definitely recommend this one. And Thebes is incredibly important in the overall Greek narrative and where we go from here, because the next major player to enter the scene with force is the Macedonians. And a note on the pronunciation. When referring to it in its modern form, Macedonia is typically how you would say it, but when referring to it in its ancient days, Macedonia is also fairly common and closer to ancient Greek. Also, I just think it sounds cooler, so you can argue with your dog if you don't like it. Like R.F. Kuang said, don't be a dick, don't be pedantic. Anyway, Alexander the Great's father, Philip II, was a political hostage of the Thebans in his formative years. And he supposedly learned like a great many things about military tactics and warfare from them. So he took what he learned from them and he incorporated it into what the Macedonians were doing. And he made some additional tweaks, and boom, now he has a powerhouse military machine at his disposal, and he starts dominating the region. And I often feel Philip gets the short end of the stick when talking about this era, but there's been a movement to correct that by some historians. For instance, in 2010, the military historian Richard A. Gabriel wrote Philip II of Macedonia, greater than Alexander, which makes his take on that very clear and is well worth the read, even if you don't fully agree with this take. I loved it. And now that I'm talking about it, I might like get the $40 limited edition print hardcover gimmick. So I might spend some money there. And for all of the books on Alexander the Great, I think the one that I enjoyed the most, and it does an excellent job of covering Philip's story as well, is Adrian Goldsworthy's dual biography, Philip and Alexander, Kings and Conquerors. The first 200 plus pages of this focuses on everything that Philip did to become like a menace to Greece and set up Alexander for his eventual success. You'll unpack his rise to power after the assassination of his brother, his military reforms, his campaigns in the Balkans, how he outmaneuvered Athens and other city-states in the political arena, the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, where he smashes Athens and Thebes, the formation of the League of Corinth in 337 BC, and finally his assassination in 336 BC, which is like the ancient version of like the JFK assassination with all sorts of wild conspiracy theories around it. And that assassination sets the stage for Alexander, who now inherits Philip's military machine and his plans to invade Persia. And Alexander quickly like pounces on this opportunity by consolidating his power. He's crushing revolts. And now he's setting off into Asia Minor, where he sees tremendous success in 3 major battles. And we go on from there all the way to his death until 323 BC, which is yet another mystery just ripe for conspiracy theories. So for my money, this is the best modern work on the Macedonian run that changed the course of world history. And like Goldsworthy doesn't write with the type of flair of a Tom Holland, but his work is so grounded and detailed. It's going to give you just about everything you need to know about these two figures and their impact. As a sidebar recommendation here, I mentioned how Philip doesn't get his due, but perhaps even more interesting and underrated in this story is Alexander the Great's mother, Olympias. And not just in this story, she might be one of the most interesting figures in the ancient world, man or woman. And for that, this scholarly monograph from Elizabeth Carney, Olympias, Mother of Alexander the Great, is fantastic. Carney set out to create a definitive guide for the first woman to play a major role in Greek political history. And for my money, she succeeds, picking through all the hostile sources and their motivations to uncover a more realized and fully formed version of Olympias. And I was thoroughly convinced by Carney's arguments in this. I love this. Now, even after Alexander's death, Olympias plays a major role in the Wars of the Diadochi, aka the Successor Wars, or the Wars of the Successors, however you want to say it. And this is where all these various fragments of Alexander's empire start warring with each other, trying to carve out their slice of the pie after this massive conquest. And this is a super complicated and messy series of events spanning at least roughly 40 years with tons of key power players and shifting alliances and battles. And it has everything. And for that, we're going to go back to James Romm and his brilliant 5-star book, Ghost on the Throne, The Death of Alexander the Great, and the bloody fight for his empire. This is an all-time favorite of mine. I had no idea how interesting these events could be. In fact, I didn't even trust myself to grasp what the hell was happening, but Romm again delivers in making the complicated accessible. If you're interested in Alexander and haven't read about this period, I am begging you to try this out because it is off the chart bonkers. So this isn't where ancient Greek history ends. Some would say it's more like 146 BC when Rome conquers Greece is the official end of the Hellenistic Greeks, whatever you believe. I don't have a single book that narrowly focuses on the Romans conquering Greece to recommend, so I would actually need some recommendations here, and I'll just use this as a natural stopping point. And thank you for sticking around and listening to me yapping. I hope I've given you a decent roadmap for your Greek history journey, or at least gave you some new books to add to your collection. And if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like, subscribe. That'd be cool. Either way, I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you on the next one.